I would like to add a point here. Rabbi Leiter, in his efforts to bring together different people and keep them within the Jewish fold, besides that, there were certain people that he had a tremendous relationship with way back from Europe. I mentioned to you Rabbi Meir Shapiro. Rabbi Meir Shapiro was an amazing personality, and I want you to take a look. There happens to be a lot of correspondence between the two of them that he used to write to my father, okay, from St. Louis, from New York, from Philadelphia, from Boston, wherever he was, and from Europe, of course. But I have a postcard which is really, really interesting. I have to get a hold of it for you to show you how he wrote to my father when he was on the boat outside New York, and he dropped a line to my father then too, from the boat. They were very close. He visited together with my father. They talked many, many hours in Boston when Rabbi Meir Shapiro was there, gathering funds for his yeshiva and discussing the mahalach, the way, the derech, the approach that his yeshiva would take in learning, etc. And they spent quite a bit of time together. As I say, they knew each other from Europe. They were both from the Chortke Hasidim group, which had a lot of major rabbis in it. But let's go forward. Besides his relationship with Rabbi Meir Shapiro, which was extremely close and even mentioned in several other places, in fact, there was a great rabbi, a tremendous goyen, an American Rogatchover almost, in Baltimore, Rabbi Forschlager. Rabbi Forschlager, they put out a book of his, one of the 50 volumes they hope to eventually put out. And in there, he brings down that Rabbi Meir Shapiro wrote a letter to Rabbi Forschlager asking for his help and telling him there are some people in America already helping me. Amongst them is Rabbi Wolf Leiter of Pittsburgh. So that he mentions him specifically as being somebody of, and he was of great help. He made extra efforts for him, as I say, even, taking him into the, how should we say, the Reform rabbis' confines, as it were, precincts, to get, assistance for the yeshiva. And I assume with that letter that you heard, that we read before you and showed you, that he was probably fairly successful. There were other people, though, that he didn't forget. And I think this is very important. When Rabbi Leiter came to Pittsburgh, there was a Western penitentiary. In other words, a maximum security institution for people who committed serious crimes. And there were about 16 Jews around the time he came out of 800 or 900 inmates. Jews were not as well-to-do then as today, and they got themselves in a lot of trouble. And they even had a Sefer Torah there that they were able to learn on Shabbos. In fact, that is brought up by Rabbi Leiter in a question to Rabbi Meir Ark of Europe, one of the big three, Galicianer, Gedolei Hador. And so that was one area that he came and became a chaplain, brought them kosher food for Passover, etc., and did whatever he was able to do. I later on, when I left Lakewood back in the 60s and came to assist my father for about 8 years and a half, that was a time that my father was in his 70s, and I took over certain functions that were a little bit taxing on him. So I used to go there and also arrange for, Passover food, etc., and bump into someone who was not Jewish, but who wanted to become Jewish for Passover, because they knew some goodies were coming. But be that as it may, I also became a member of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. There was a gentleman named Frank Pohl, He was a Catholic and an attorney in a major legal firm in Pittsburgh, and he set up this organization to help people to leave the confines of the penitentiary, be paroled, get out, have a place to stay, get a job, get back into society. It was a simple, straightforward idea, which is being discussed today in the United States of America, to see to it that people will get a second chance, but they need a little bit of help. But this was being done already, in the 60s and before by Mr. Frank Poole, a very good man who's no longer with us, but he was, and I joined that group because of my father's relationship to the penitentiary. My father also helped see to it, as soon as he got there, fairly soon after, there was a kosher kitchen in the Montefiore Hospital for people who wanted to eat kosher. People got sick. Observant people can get sick too. Non-observant or observant. Sickness visits us all. But the comfort and the ability to feel that you're doing still what is incumbent on you is a little bit more of a problem for people who eat only kosher. And my father was extremely instrumental in seeing to it. And then he gave his guidance to the kosher kitchen there with the mashgiach and everything gratis over many decades. So he had in mind the sick, and he had in mind those who were in prisons. This is the man who was worried about the women who were going to become agunot, chained women, and that was also a major factor in his work there, which he had really been involved in, and his father and grandfather had been involved in Europe. So he saw to it that these people were aware of a need for a get, a Jewish divorce, and not only Rabbi Goldenson was helpful in this area from the Reform Temple, but his successor, Rabbi Solomon B. Freehoff, who became rather a great admirer of my father and very helpful to him, especially in this area, and propagating the idea and the understanding of what a truly great scholar Pittsburgh now had in its midst, and could speak the language of the public, not only Yiddish or with an accent, except maybe a slight Oxfordian accent, since my father had learned his English in Galicia in Poland when he was 16 from an Englishman. He wanted to know the language, and he picked out an Englishman, and he got the start. And he continued studying this language to some degree with some of his rabbinic friends there that he made. One of them, Dr. Halpern, who later, under the influence of my father, he was a very left-wing, extreme left-wing rabbi in the conservative movement. They even used an organ in his synagogue at the time, which his son used to play for the congregation on Shabbat. But he was influenced to the extent that he wrote about Rashi. And then he wrote about Rashi being a great influence on one of the Christian savants of the Middle Ages, Nicholas de Lyra. I believe he got his doctorate on that work. But he maintained some kind of relationship with Judaism because of my father, you understand, and helped others who wanted perhaps to do things that are incumbent on observant Jews so as not to be cast out for future generations. He was helpful in that regard too. So many Jewish lives and families benefited from this Shelsheles Shel Am Yisrael.